Welcome everyone to this colloquium on AI and creativity. My name is John Tsoulis. I'm the director of the Institute for Ethics in AI here in Oxford, and this colloquium is part of Torch's series Artful Intelligence. Now, of course, it's become very clear that the arts and the humanities are vitally important for engaging with artificial intelligence because it's a technology that, in a sense, fundamentally challenges us to reflect upon what it means to be human, what is distinctively valuable about being human, what gives meaning and value to a human life. And the arts and humanities offer rich traditions that reflect on precisely these issues. Now, some of these traditions emphasize how the human mind is in some sense able to mirror or reflect a pre-existing order of reasons or truths or values. Think, for example, of Aristotle's picture of eudaimonia as reflection on eternal truths. But there are also other understandings of human nature and its flourishing, and some of these find the locus of human dignity in creativity. Think, for example, of the Renaissance philosopher Pico della Mirandola, who located human dignity in the fact that, like God, man is a creator, including, most importantly, a creator of himself, with the capacity to be that which he wills. Now, new developments in AI technology, especially generative AI, confront us with what looks like an unprecedented challenge to our status as creators in the universe. So these are really quite deep issues about what humans are like, what gives value to human life, and how AI technology can fit into that schema, either in a beneficial way or a disruptive way. Now, to help us engage with these profound issues, we have a stellar group of speakers. Our main speaker is Ye-Jin Choi. She's one of the most brilliant AI researchers in the world. She's a professor of computer science at the University of Washington, the holder of a MacArthur Genius Grant. I think they're still called Genius Grants. And most importantly, honorary research fellow of the Institute for Ethics in AI here in Oxford. Her research focuses on how AI systems might be able to acquire common sense, and in particular, common moral sense. And I strongly recommend people to go onto her automated system called Delphi, which will answer all of your moral dilemmas. Estella Z is also on the panel. She's a virtual and augmented reality creative director and artist from Portland, Oregon. And we're very proud to have her as a visiting fellow this term at the Institute for Ethics in AI. Her augmented reality exhibition, In Bloom, opens on June 5th in Gloucester Green. You can pay me later for the advert. Nigel Warburton, also on our panel, is one of the most impactful philosophers in the world. His podcast, Philosophy Bites, has been downloaded, he tells me, 46 million times. And Nigel has a special interest in the philosophy of art, especially architecture and photography. And last but not least, I'm especially delighted to welcome our chair, Paul Holdengraber, who is an interviewer and curator and the founding executive director of Onassis Los Angeles. He was previously founder and director of the New York Public Library's. Oh, interesting.
I didn't mean to do that.
Well, I wouldn't put it past you, Paul, but anyway, let's move on. He was previously founder and director of the New York Public Library's Live from NYPL cultural series and has interviewed creative individuals ranging from Patti Smith to Mike Tyson. So this is our fabulous panel. I now will turn over to Paul, who will orchestrate the rest of the proceedings. Thank you.
I'm really delighted. Thank you, John, for that very lovely introduction. I'm sorry for that little noise that happened right in the middle. It's really a pleasure to be here, a distinct pleasure to be here and to be with you this afternoon. I understand that this is part of an ongoing series at Oxford University, Artful Intelligence, and they say that it's creative conversations around AI. So our task here today is to have a creative conversation about AI, and importantly, to have a creative conversation about creativity in AI. Now, I know that usually in such settings, one might begin with a keynote speech, but I thought I would mix things up a tiny bit just for a little variety to what you're used to, and begin with a quotation. I'm a quotomaniac by profession. Quotomania, by the way, is a word I invented, but I'm a quotomaniac by profession, so I'll quote a short paragraph and get your reactions to it. And I know it's thinking on your feet, but I think this is what we need to do. I'm also extremely interested, I must say, that our panel today, our colloquium today, is on the nature, reflections on the nature of artificial in parentheses. I wonder who is responsible for putting artificial in parentheses. I feel it might be John. Intelligence and creativity. So I would like to begin with this quotation from Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI. I remember, just a little digression before I read it, I remember that when John and I initially spoke about this possibility of chairing this panel with you today, a sentence, another quotation came to my mind. When I was about 14 or 15 years old in Belgium, we would get a sentence on which we had to write what they called une dissertation. It was by no means a dissertation. It was a paper of 3 or 4 pages. And I have never forgotten that sentence. It's from Rabelais' Pantagruel. He says, "Science sans conscience n'est que ruine de l'âme. Science without a consciousness is but the ruin of the soul." And to my mind, that quotation really, we might unpack the implications of that quotation in our conversation. Now, to this short paragraph, I'd love your reactions to it. Then we will move back into the audience and hear your presentation, and then we'll come back. So it will be a bit of a movable feast today. So this is a quotation that comes from Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI. AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. Rather, artificial intelligence is both embodied and material, made from natural resources, fuel, human labor, infrastructures, logistics, histories, and classifications. AI systems are not autonomous, rational, or able to discern anything without extensive, computationally intensive training with large data sets or predefined rules and rewards. In fact, artificial intelligence, as we know it, depends entirely on a much wider set of political and social structures. And due to the capital required to build AI at scale and the ways of seeing that it optimizes, AI systems are ultimately designed to serve existing dominant interests. In this sense, artificial intelligence is a registry of power. This was written a couple of years ago, as I understand it. And I won't call on you. It's certainly not an exam. So.
Yeah, I can go first. First of all, the parenthesis was mine.
Pardon?
The parenthesis on artificial
is yours. Okay,
title.
John,
yeah.
you're off the hook. Okay.
So yeah, the paragraph isn't written a few years ago, so a lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
But there's something that never changed, which is that AI, especially as it becomes a more powerful tool than at that time, it remains to be the tool that can be really used by the organizations or people in power. And it can really accentuate that aspect. So in my recent TED talk, I did talk about how this is a real concern, that especially the extreme scaleness of this current AI belonging only to a few tech companies that are rich enough to create it and own it, and then people cannot really inspect it. This is a major problem to address.
I'm interested in why she would say it's not artificial, because I'd have thought artificial intelligence in that context just means something that didn't evolve from living beings or through the process of natural selection. It's something that was self-consciously created as an artifact. It's a creation, and that's undeniable, that what we call artificial intelligence has been produced in that way. So it's a kind of slightly weird, provocative line. I haven't read the book, so I don't know how she cashes that out. But in terms of power, surely it's true that you can read power into every cultural phenomenon. Particularly for a Marxist, you're going to see the power in the art world, for instance. The art world, the art world for the visual arts is taken as a kind of paradigm of creativity, but is absolutely infused with power relations. Some of them very explicit, and actually some of the same participants in being involved in terms of very rich people buying iconic works of art for a combination of prestige, peacock's tail, and who knows what, and status, love of art as well.
Status. Yeah. I wonder if she uses the word artificial to distinguish herself from what she calls embodied. Made of a story of oneself. Not sure.
I mean, I think it's great that she connects artificial intelligence to the world of scarce resources, ecological significance of the ecological significance of huge data banks being kept cool in the desert somewhere. That's great.
Yeah, definitely. In line with both of the things y'all mentioned, for sure those aspects of who's in power and what does it mean to be artificial? How does that get defined? I like to think about who is being exploited or harmed in the system of the politics of technology, especially who are the gatekeepers and who has access to technologies, and what aspects of humanity or the environment is being harmed in that way. Just examples of using generative art. Did all the artists that are part of that data set consent to having their art be part of that? Examples of that.
How is it used?
Yes, how is it used? A lot of them didn't even agree to have their art used in such a way. So these are the things I kind of think about in terms of the ethics of artists in this AI space right now.
I'm going to let you do your presentation. Mm-hmm. I wanted to begin this way because I found Kate Crawford's comment provocative, and it would just set a mood of provocation that you now you have the floor to provoke further.
And it's, I'm going to answer the question about what did she may have meant by artificial in my talk, so it's a perfect segue. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so extremely honored to give a talk about AI and creativity, and especially considering the presence of renowned moral philosophers in the audience, I feel obliged to start with this quote by Immanuel Kant, who said, "There can be original nonsense." So this quote was given in the context of discussing what makes an artist a great artist. The artist should demonstrate not only originality, but exemplary originality, so that her work isn't original nonsense. I'm going to come back to this point later in the talk, but let's first reflect on the nature of artificial intelligence in light of human intelligence. So one aspect of AI relevant for the purpose of this talk that I want to emphasize is that it can be viewed as a form of collective human intelligence. And I think that's one way how we can interpret what Kate Crawford may have meant by artificial, not that artificial at the end of the day. So in a way, it's far more collective than what any group of humans could have coordinated to collaborate. And in general, I mean, humans, when we collaborate, we can do better than a single human being. And imagine AI being able to collaborate without consent of humans so collectively, so it can become very powerful. And what's really interesting is that AI is only possible because of the internet, which is the digital archive of human intelligence. And some of you might remember, if you're old enough, about 30 years ago, we started the internet with this shabby Netscape browser. And it used to be painfully slow, and there was not that much of an interesting information to explore there. Little did we anticipate that the accumulation of our digital traces one day will give a rise to such a powerful generative AI models as DALL-E and ChatGPT, though. So in other words, AI builds on the giant shoulders of humans, and it really became a huge giant, more so than we anticipated. And it's quite phenomenal, but it's important to remember that AI is not perfect. AI is flawed. One of the problems is that AI mirrors humans a bit too much, both good and bad, including racism and sexism and misinformation that humans spread to each other. And moreover, AI doesn't have the true bio-embodiment, and as a result, it has this distorted sense of reality. And also, it cannot really discern truth from hallucination all that reliably, and then it lacks robust common sense. To make a concrete point, I asked the DALL-E tool to generate a 3D rendering illustration of a human looking into a mirror in which an AI robot is reflected. And I mean, the robot is not in the mirror, and what's reflected in the mirror is random. And the second one doesn't even have a human. So it does lack common sense or the real 3D understanding. But as you may have experienced, if you keep generating, eventually you find some examples that are better. So one thing that I want to highlight here is that when you see people sharing these amazing examples, they're not just sharing the first example that came out of DALL-E 2. Usually, they generate a lot, and then it's a human intelligence that does the selection, the curation work. So it is really human that knows which one is original nonsense and which one is sensible originality. Okay, so it's almost like AI is a new type of intellectual species that can be both superior and inferior to humans, and we really need to learn to coexist. And what I mean by that is to understand the limitation of AI so that we don't over-rely on it and then appear in the New York Times headline because you copy and paste the ChatGPT as a lawyer, and it turns out it was all wrong. But also, not just the limitation, we do need to recognize the potential power, the positive implication that AI can have. And one really good example is this Khan Academy making this a new AI tool based on GPT-4 for democratizing education access. And so this is really exciting example of a positive use case that sort of really try to support the people who are not in power. So we just explored the broader intelligence, but now let's zoom in to the creativity. So cannot come up with a better quote than what's given by Albert Einstein, who said, "The secret to creativity is knowing how to hide your sources." And in a way, ChatGPT is really nailing it today. So this is alluding to the fact that creativity is oftentimes a new synthesis of already existing ideas. And AI has access to a vast range of already existing ideas. And it does have a bit of an advantage that it has this unhinged capability to synthesize them. And in a way, the common sense we have as humans are disadvantaged in really pushing the boundaries and breaking the norms, and then even be rebellious against the conventional way of doing things. But of course, AI also has weaknesses as creative tool. First of all, it doesn't really have a taste. It's a human who does the selection who has the taste. But when you first hand generate something out of generative AI models, it's varied. And then there's this question of true, groundbreaking, genuine, surprising novelty. So as a thought experiment, if we train generative AI like DALL-E on images that were painted before Picasso's time, would DALL-E come up with Picasso-type genuine creativity? I think not. And similarly, if we trained ChatGPT on onion text that existed before Albert Einstein's time, would ChatGPT come up with the theory about relativity? I don't think so. So there's something about the limited scope of creativity that this generative AI seems to be capable of. Now, I want to discuss a little bit more about the implication of artificial creativity on human creativity. In a nutshell, it's a hot mess of everything everywhere, all at the same time, in that there are just enormous potentials for both amazing positives as well as serious concerns. It's going to both empower some humans while depower others. And so let's drill a little bit more into the positive potentials. So humanity at large, when we think about humanity at large, there's real potential for democratization. Especially, if we just talk about art, then the non-experts, the newcomers, they can all benefit a great deal from these generative AI tools. And even especially those people who cannot really enroll to expensive art school, they might be able to educate themselves through these interactions with AI tools. And also, more broadly, it can serve as a new source of inspirations for humans, essentially enabling AI-human collaboration, which is similar to human-human collaboration, but for people who don't have immediate access to collaborators, that can be really enabling. And it also does bring a lot of joy to people. So Jack Hessel, my colleague at Allen Institute for AI, he generated a lot of AI art. So this one is vintage national park posters of each planet in the solar system. And it's supposed to be about Jupiter. And of course, there's spelling errors. But stylish, aesthetically pleasing. And there are more examples here on Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. But it could also benefit artists as well, especially the early adopters and those artists who come up with novel ways of integrating generative AI for their work. And I'm not just saying this as an AI researcher, as a wishful thought. I'm actually speaking after talking to this amazing artist that I met earlier this year at the TED conference. Aileen Isagon-Skyers and Misan Hariman, they both gave talks. I don't know if their talks are available already. They were amazing talks. I highly recommend. And I was pleasantly surprised. to hear that they are not threatened by AI. They are very excited about the positive potentials, the new ways of visual expressions that they can do. Aileen, in particular, said that she needs to curate so much, and in some sense, it makes it her work even harder, but still she was excited about it, and she said the artists in her network share similar sentiment as well. And of course, industry, they're probably the most excited right now because there's a cost saving as well as new commercialization opportunities as well. But we cannot ignore the major negative potentials as well, especially there's real concerns about the job securities of artists. And then there's a systematic, unethical devaluation of their novel contributions. But even if you are not an artist, even if you're just like doing art as your hobby, I think it's a bothersome situation even for us as well, because it's in some sense collaboration and exploitation without your consent. And imagine that you shared this amazing photo, or just like a painting you did as a hobby, or a song that you wrote, and then suddenly it's just regurgitated by ChatGPT, and everybody has it in their Facebook post. How would you feel about that without due credit? And then there's also concern about, are we going to face collective loss of creative muscles due to the over-reliance on the generative AI? And then personally, I don't feel very good about the fact that internet might no longer be ours. It might be flooded with the output of generative AI, which may become a lot of similar stuff being repeated. So it's almost as if we have this generative AI trolley situation, because whether you do a full stop or you just let it go, somebody will suffer. But as we all know, trolley problems are artificial in the sense that it's not the case that there are only two solutions to choose from. The world is not binary. It's up for us to create novel creative solutions. So now I'm going to make a call to action for creative solutions. And I want to emphasize the fact that unprecedented situations require unprecedented solutions, and generative AI, especially ChatGPT, will not tell us what we are supposed to do. We humans must come up with those solutions. At the scientific level, for example, we could invent new algorithms for detecting and quantifying the sources, so that even if it's used a little bit, somehow there's a way to credit the sources back when possible. At the societal level, perhaps we can opt for human artists, similar to how sometimes we opt for local farms or organic produce or coffee beans based on fair trade. Maybe we can think about generative AI text for supporting people who are directly impacted. And then perhaps we can also put regulations to companies to require minimum human workers so that they don't just fire everybody and then rely on generative AI. At the individual level, I think there's probably a lot we can think about, but I want to share this one quote from Marcus Aurelius, who said, "The impediment to action advances the action. What stands in the way becomes the way." During the pandemic time, I discovered Stoicism. This speaks to me so well. It's a story of my life, the impediments, overcoming the impediments. I think when I reflect, sometimes it's just so hard, but only because of the challenge, I discovered something that otherwise I would have never discovered, and then I got excited to work on it. So perhaps we could try to find a way to deal with the current situation in a creative way. By the way, the challenge is not just on artists. It's AI researchers as well as programmers. We're all challenged by what ChatGPT is capable of. So lastly, I want to make a comment about what is uniquely humans. So first of all, art, in my mind, is often about the process, and AI cannot replace the process. So I sometimes climb a high mountain, and I want to do the work. I don't want to be lifted from the trailhead and then teleported at the summit. What's the point? I want to suffer through every step. And so, that's something that's uniquely human. The courage. Some artists stuck with their vision their entire life, despite the fact that nobody understood them, and then it's only recognized post-mortem. So it's something I don't think generative AI will do. And finally, of course, the taste for recognizing exemplary creativity. I want to share my shabby drawing from a while ago to drill into this point. I don't have the technique, but I had this vision to draw a rose that has these exaggerated thorns with no leaves, and it has weird colorways. And I was going through yet another impediment in my life, and I felt I need to express this, but I don't know how to put this feeling into words, and the only way I could achieve it was through this particular way of drawing a rose. So I asked DALL-E 2 to draw a pastel painting of a rose with two very exaggerated thorns and no leaves. And if you want to hang something on the wall, probably DALL-E 2 art is better. It's more pleasant to look at. But it's not what I wanted to express. So there's something about art that serves as the representation medium that is uniquely human. But about my, questionable depiction of a rose, it so happens that, so I found this quote yesterday. This is from Henri Matisse, one of my favorite artists, who said there's nothing more difficult for a truly creative painter than to paint a rose, because before he can do so, he has first to forget all the roses that were ever painted. And in this regard, I think that DALL-E 2 was not able to fully forget all the roses that were painted before. Thank you.
That was fabulous. I think I should start with the quotation I have of Einstein. I have an Einstein quotation too, which I think is interesting in the context of what we will be talking about. Einstein said, "I'm thankful to all those who said no, because of them I did it myself." And I think one of the dangers, as you were talking about going up the mountain, or I was thinking of Hokusai, who said that after 100 years he could finally paint the outline of the mountain. What I think the danger is that we will replace our own experience with a machine that has no experience. So I'm wondering how this resonates with all of you.
I suspect that, some people will choose not to use generative AI because they care about the process, and then some people might prefer to use it for whatever reason, and it's an individual choice.
What will they be missing?
They don't care about, some people prefer to just take a car all the way up just to enjoy the view, but they don't want to. So I think it's really personal choice.
So some people don't want to suffer, is what you're saying.
Yeah, why do I want to suffer? Actually, I do have a reason, because I want to feel this sense of achievement. It's not that I only want the pain, it's more that in return I want something back. So, why do I work so hard? Again, it's not that, this 2 long hours of work in itself is pleasant, it's more because there's this end purpose that's waiting for me. And it's a uniquely human thing, but yeah.
Nigel,
I mean, I love that you focus on the process, because that's something I was thinking about with creativity in this context. We're talking about meaningful creativity, and what is it for creativity to be meaningful? And within the arts, traditionally, it's to create things as human beings at a particular point in time. And when people, forgers or whatever, produce very similar things afterwards, they're not producing the same thing at all. It's something completely different with different artistic qualities, even if it's visually indistinguishable. So I think some people, but obviously not you, are in a grip of a kind of WYSIWYG theory of the arts, that if it looks the same, it is the same. But I think the etiology, how it came to be as it is absolutely central to most of the arts. And why is that? It might be because of a kind of bizarre psychological phenomenon that we have a kind of essentialist view of things, that only the painting that Van Gogh touched is the real one. Or it could be there's something else about a kind of authentic object, in the same way that we think of an object with sentimental value. You know, I've got a pen that belonged to my grandfather. Don't give me an identical one. It wouldn't be the same pen. It wouldn't have the same authentic emotional connection with my grandfather, because it wasn't the one that he owned. And I don't think that's an absurd phenomenon. It's all the way through the arts. Just producing the same kind of sound that a great, like John Williams, the classical guitarist, if you could teach me somehow using ChatGPT to replicate him playing but a piece he's never played, that wouldn't have the same meaning. It wouldn't have the same, as a performance, it wouldn't be the same expressive thing. It would be something completely different with different qualities. I mean, it may have its own values, it may be entertainment, and I think we can create great entertainment art through these media. But if we value the connection with human beings, the emotional connection with human beings, I suspect it's going to be most useful as a tool rather than as a creative artist. You know, we talk about artificial artists may be interesting phenomena generating things that seem to be like works of art, and maybe we'll develop a way of, I mean, I think they're attributing kind of quasi-intentions to them so we can adopt the same kinds of attitudes as we would to a genuine Van Gogh painting, but I'm sceptical. I think we're so much in the world, our generation anyway, or my generation, is so much in the world of original objects, things which have connections with human beings, a shaping intellect, that we find facsimiles unsatisfactory, however brilliant they are.
I think it's interesting, the thread that I kind of see through that is that different people will have different meanings to art, right? Everybody has a different purpose of why they might want to take a car up a hill or versus hiking. Each person has a different perspective and reason for why they might want to do something. And I think everyone should kind of have the right to have those choices. I think what kind of things that I ponder about, like what does that mean for like what does art become when this evolves? What does art become, and what does it mean to be a leader in creativity if this is changing so quickly? And what does it mean to be a teacher in the arts? If generative AI is considered an art medium, whether it's distinguishable or not, or like how does one become a teacher? What does it mean to learn how to art? I think about some of the emotional challenges, not just for artists, but as people in our expression. A lot of people who don't draw, usually by the age 9 or 12, somebody has said something about their drawing that makes them close up and they just don't draw anymore. So a lot of people as humans already have this insecurity with their expression of art. So what does that do for us as humans in our expression and our insecurities with our creative expression? I think stuff like this would really kind of put people more in their shell. I'm not against AI, don't get me wrong, I'm just trying to like play devil's advocate and thinking
I
about
hope
these.
it doesn't feel like AI bashing.
No.
This is-
Actually, a lot of people
Yeah.
said the same
Yeah.
kind of thing about photography, the invention of photography.
And digital
Um,
photography, digital art as well. So like these are just the things I think about where, you know, kind of repeating the same kind of questions that came around when I'm sure digital photography, digital painting kind of came around too. It's just happening a lot faster without regulation.
I totally agree with everything that is said so far. There's one interesting question that I want to respond about what it means to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Because not only in the art, in AI, because the field is moving so fast, the question is relevant to us as well. And my conclusion is that the only way to remain as a teacher is to be a student as well. I mean, you have to be a student and you have to learn constantly, whether you like it or not. And if you like to be a student, then it's perfect.
There's a kind of moral issue there. I was recently asked to be involved training some kind of ChatGPT type, whatever you call them, bot, I don't know whether you call them a bot, to help people read classic texts of philosophy. And I have a moral dilemma. You know, as a writer, I value copyright. I think this has been a good compromise as a way of freelance writers, particularly having a way of earning a living. They're suffering. You know, this is not a great time for freelance writers, but there's a way of getting recompense for the labour that you put in, even when other people use your work to some extent. And there are collective licensing schemes that allow you to get money still, even if other people do use your work. So collaborating in something like that, would I be exploiting commentators on this text because I'm kind of facilitating the use of their creativity to make this teaching tool, which itself might be wonderful? Or would I be doing something fantastic for humanity because I'm kind of liberating, I'm helping this fairly primitive generative AI to learn to be a better teacher and then to facilitate access to the great works of philosophy? So my hunch is that I'd be helping to destroy my fellow writers' means of living. That's my hunch. But it's possible that some collaborative scheme will emerge where we get collective licensing that does allow something to flow back to the creators of the material that has trained these bots. But it'll be like Spotify or something. It'll be like 1p, you know, because there's so many elements that go into the creation.
Things are moving so fast, and I realize even the quotation I started with is already nearly a dinosaur in the field of AI, and it's tough to keep up with this, right? It must be extraordinary. I mean, you must be a student because there are things to learn about it every moment. But I wonder. It probably isn't utopian at all to say that there'll come a time where we won't really be able to distinguish if a human hand did something, or if it was done by Cézanne, or if it was done by a great musician. Are we going into that direction where, in effect, what I'm trying to say is, Nigel, I think we probably see eye to eye on this. I'm going to try this out on you, that the erratic quality of a work of art still means something in the Benjaminian sense. There's still something about the touch, or a wonderful quotation I brought here for your consideration is from one of my very favorite essays of Walter Benjamin, where it's called The Storyteller, where he says, "Thus the traces cling to the story the way handprints of the potter cling to the clay vessel." So the potter, you can sort of see the fingerprints, not quite literally, but you know it's made by someone who has craft. But we sometimes know that this is made by human beings, but if we didn't know, would it really matter?
So this artist that I met at the TED conference, like Misan, he seemed to think that if he's moved by an art, he doesn't care whether it's coming from AI or not. But in his case, he does know that it's coming from AI. But in the future, will there be a situation in which we cannot tell the difference? And in fact, it is already happening right now in the sense that if you're looking for a run-of-mill text, run-of-mill paragraph, then yeah, we cannot tell the difference. But if you're looking for Hemingway, then there's a difference. So I think it's a mix of the two.
I think
So
there's.
because you work in this
Yeah.
world. So I don't know if you work in artificial intelligence quite.
Less so for ethical reasons. Just my peers work in a lot of the studios in LA. They are a lot of the concept artists, so a lot of their work is being used in the data sets. So there's already a lot of litigation to just regulate that. You and I spoke a little bit about the WGA Writers Strike that's going on.
Maybe you want to unpack that a little bit because I'm not.
Yes.
I think it's very important for our conversation.
So the strike has a lot to do with the writers and the use of studios' use of AI-generated scripts and stories. Where does that come from? Does that mean that writers will no longer have jobs? What does that mean? So it's a big topic. There's a lot there in terms of.
It's a big topic also because writers now feel that very soon they might become just rewriters. We'll do a script and then we'll bring in a writer to just actually provide a human touch to it, to make it feel more human.
Yeah, and I think I would be very offended as a writer if somebody realized the implications of that as an industry for people who have refined and worked on the skill their whole lives.
To have gone up that mountain for a long time.
So what does that mean when the industry that you serve no longer supports your craft, and where do you go with that, right? I'm grateful that the work that I do is in innovation and is keeping up with latest technologies. That's what I thrive in. But not all creatives or artists are able to do that, and not all artists and creatives are thrive in their expression in that way. So, the questions that we have about originals versus copies versus prints. Artists are creative and they find ways to make industries work for them, right? So there is a market for original art in galleries. There's also a market for illustrators that produce a lot of work that could be bought at IKEA, that can go on the wall. And there's markets for these things. I don't remember where I was going with my thoughts because, we went down a path, but yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this the writers' strike, I was quite interested in. So it looks like things were not good even before generative AI, and then all the more they feel very concerned, and so that's where I feel like, can we do something at the societal level by, for example, not watching a movie, boycotting a movie that did not hire human writers, or they didn't pay them well enough. Couldn't we do this at the societal level instead of feeling completely hopeless? There must be something we can do here, as opposed to doing nothing, but just having these movie companies do whatever they want. And in fact, I suspect that, if it is truly the case that humans are well paid, and right now it looks like they're very overworked. That's another problem. They're already as is overly worked, and then they worry that they are going to be replaced. So their work condition was not very good to begin with. But what if hypothetically they can be better paid and they can work a little bit less than, they work usual normal hours with the help of generative AI, and then perhaps the industry can make more movies so that they create more jobs for writers. And I wonder whether there can be alternative routes in which we try to coexist as opposed to trying to replace humans with either AI or actually replace humans with humans who use AI is more like it. So I do wonder whether instead of taking it as more like a trolley situation, can we come up with more creative solutions? But I do think that there needs to be regulations that puts pressure on these companies that are rich enough to...
But I've been reading a lot about regulations, and John has written about it, and other scholars have written about it. How likely is it that regulation will work?
Oh, so oftentimes people ask that question in the context of developing AI. That is hard to regulate. Even so, I think we need to try, even if it's hard. But as far as the use of generative AI, and then providing proof about having human workers, that seems doable, no? I mean, it's like more easily transparent, so similar to organic produce and I mean coffee beans, fair trade. We already care about these things.
I think the kind of analogy, at least for visual artists in the field, is like if it was possible in music, for you to trace whether there's copywritten music in your video and you upload it, why can't that be possible for the visual arts? We're often like the underdogs, like, wait, people forgot about the rights for visual artists, you know, like everyone is underpaying us or whatever it is. All artists are underpaid everywhere, really, honestly. And it's like, why isn't that already regulated? You know, kind of going back to what you were just talking about, Yejin, is like why, like artists are already going through such challenging situations, and this happens now. People are losing jobs. They're no longer having access to those things. And in America, if you don't have jobs, that means your healthcare, your like all your like medical needs, all your insurance and everything, like your retirement, all of that is part of the working industry. So if that falls apart, everything falls apart in a capitalist society.
Nigel, did you want to comment?
I was just thinking about the sorts of arguments people use for keeping coal mines in Britain. You know, when they're past their economic viability, when the conditions are harsh, but lots of people wanted to keep those communities together, which are grown up around coal mining. There's this real tension when there's a revolution between having a kind of conservatism that keeps on doing the same kind of thing and exploiting the new mechanisms that allow people to do things more efficiently, perhaps in a more healthy way. Hunched over a typewriter, you know, you get arthritis eventually hitting typewriter keys. Things have improved. Very few writers now use typewriters. Maybe with ChatGPT, you know, we could have this wonderful world of writers who work for like a few hours a day and produce a huge amount of brilliant output in that collaboration with it. But I'm skeptical because the economic drive will be to minimize the input of the writers because they're the more expensive bit. If the quality is high, you might say if you're a dream factory and you want to produce Hollywood movies of a certain type, a kind of genre type, and ChatGPT does it cheaper and does it better, why would you employ writers? You know, there's also no given that there has to be the job of Hollywood scriptwriter forever. Yeah, these things change. It's terrible for the people who were caught up in the transition, who weren't expecting that, didn't see it. But I don't think the solution is necessarily to preserve exactly what we have now as some kind of retro pool of people with typewriters working on scripts. It may be that people have to move with the times, and that's just tough for lots of people. But perhaps new kinds of collaboration, new amazing directors and writers can emerge in a different way.
I think part of that is that, yes, and they should be part of the conversations. And the question is, for me, like that I think about, are they part of those conversations right now with the technologies that are creating AI? Are they part of that, you know?
Well, have writers been a big part of the conversation with publishers? You know, publishers have made a lot of money from writers, not outside the movie industry, and they're to some extent victims of publishers quite often, collaborators, but many writers don't feel they get their fair share from publishers. There are always these complicated dynamics. and the people with power tend to pay you less than they should.
Should we address the issue that you spoke about briefly, the issue of taste? Because I think that is really tremendously important. One often says, de gustibus non disputandum est, of tastes you can't really talk about, but in the end, it's really the only interesting thing to talk about. And it feels as though AI, that's one area in which AI will probably never quite make it.
Yeah, personally, I may be a little bit more on the skeptical side of AI power, especially for, making a blockbuster movie or a TV show that everybody loves. It's just so different. That really come from ChatGPT versus human ingenuity, because again, this is a taste problem that this generative AI doesn't necessarily have. And personally, I was kind of curious because I feel like there are more TV shows than ever before. So I looked it up. More TV shows and more movies than ever before. That was just like my impression. So I looked it up, and indeed, from a decade ago, it almost like tripled the number of original TV shows made in US. So for whatever reason, there's just not enough of it, it seems. And then if the cost goes down, especially with some of the visual effects can be done by generative AI, and I'm sure that some people will make movies where, with the consent of actor, I'm sure at least one person might give a consent just for the fun of it, to like Tom Cruise maybe, to use his digital avatar to appear in the movie, and then they might be able to make movies faster, in which case there are just maybe more movies being made, which means more jobs to do as well. And I really seriously doubt that it can all be done by AI, personally. I mean, maybe, I'm not really imagining hard enough to foresee this, future in which OpenAI might drop another bomb. But I think human will have to do a lot of work as well.
I'm really interested whether you think in the future it might be possible for AI to generate something that seems to be a really meaningful work of genius. We know it isn't, in the same sense that something by Bach is a work of genius, but it has all the other qualities so that we could come to look at it. Do you think AI could do that? Something original, powerful, seems to be moving in the way that other art is?
So I'm skeptical. As a scientist, I try to work on exactly that question, but I haven't quite nailed down the answer. But one way for me to describe it is there's being creative by interpolation, perhaps, and then being creative by extrapolation. And currently, generative AI looks more like interpolation. It's combining things and then in some creative way, but is it really going completely out of the training distribution and then come up with Hemingway that was not in the training data? It's not that magical, AI.
But it's early days yet.
Huh?
But it's early days.
No, the problem is this. I mean, okay, if somebody totally invents a new form of intelligence, artificial intelligence, that really thinks like humans, then maybe. But currently transformers, just the way that it's trained and then trained to predict the next token.
But somebody could say Andy Warhol's like that. He could have been
machine.
You put pop art, you put popular culture into Andy Warhol, and out comes
but before,
pop artist,
so like as a thought experiment, if you train an AI model that has nothing quite like Andy Warhol, and then try to somehow probe it, I don't think you can do this. I mean, I tried to make it draw this rose with two exaggerated thorns, and it just cannot give up on this notion that when there's a stem, there should be lots of thorns, not like, and also the size of the thorns should be relatively smaller, right? And just like this things that's not quite in the distribution. And also, if you think about this earlier example that I showed you where a human is looking into a mirror and then sees an AI robot, it's not in the training data, so it's making lots of mistakes.
But like human beings, surely you can keep training them. It's not like we have a one-off training and then we're free
No,
and
but
just
the
do
moment
stuff.
you train on the same data, it's no longer amazing originality. It's a familiar
Oh no,
one
I mean
of
if you give feedback and say, look, hang on, this isn't quite right, and you skew it towards some more pictures of
that kind of training is not there yet.
ongoing training. But in principle, it could be though, couldn't it?
No, the declarative feedback for how to, it's not there yet.
But in principle, it's something that could be achieved.
In principle,
yeah.
I haven't seen the evidence yet, personally.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, in principle, anything may be possible. You know, human intelligence might be so amazing to come up with that kind of form of AI as well. But I just...
So it's
Yeah, but we're
human
not talking about square circles. I mean, it
Yeah,
seems...
so it's human intelligence that will make machine learning better.
Yeah, the thing about humans, by the way, is that somebody is probably, I mean, if the solution is there, somebody might want to find it and then make it, whether the rest of the humanity wants it or not. It's just the nature of humans, and I don't know whether we can somehow stop it. It seems impossible, especially when there are many countries involved. Even if it's illegal in US, it may not be illegal in some other country. Then things can still happen. And that's when I think all of this, if AI behaves, then, you know, we're happier, right? Partly we can think about the regulations about how humans don't exploit humans using AI. That's one problem in the equation. But the other problem is, you know, like AI doing silly things that can actually directly harm human beings, and that's another story. That's a morality challenge. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about this notion of hallucination?
Yeah.
Because I'm fascinated.
Yeah, so large language models are trained to predict next word, and then during the inference time, during the generation of the text, they actually use a bit of a sampling, so there's a bit of randomness, and that's a part of the reason why that may happen. But also, they sort of learn the distribution of what's the plausible next thing that you could say that is grammatically correct and coherent, but it's not really trained to think about what is the real truth that you have to memorize. So by design, it's not really trained to...
For meaning.
Yeah. And then, now the recent version tries to patch things up by doing a technique called reinforcement learning with the human feedback, RLHF, where you try to align it more toward saying the correct things, but you know, whether the gap is completely closable. Again, I'm a little more skeptical than many others, but you know, some people believe that it's trivially closable. We haven't seen the evidence yet. We'll see, but I'm skeptical. It may be one of the hardest challenges for AI to deal with.
One question that has come up for me a lot is, especially in our challenge to think about AI and creativity, is plausibility and predictability. You know, it would seem to me that artists we admire, one thing we can probably say about many of them is that predictability is not what we look for in their work.
Right.
It may be what the market wants them to do. It reminds me a little bit of a story that comes to my mind. A friend of mine was writing a book about Miles Davis in France when he was with Juliette Gréco and that whole world. And Miles Davis was coming to New York to do a concert at Carnegie Hall. And my friend Michael called up Miles Davis and said, Miles, And Miles said, I know why you're calling. You want another ticket? And he said, yeah, I want another ticket. And he said, Michael, for you, 2 tickets, no problem. Is there anything else I can do for you? He says, in fact, yes. My friend really loves My Funny Valentine. And Miles Davis said to him, tell your friend to buy the record. Wondering how you react to that anecdote in the context of what we're talking about.
In the arts, some unpredictability or change is with Picasso or with Miles Davis. They don't stay still, they keep moving. But some artists do the same thing over and over again, and the obsessive repetition of an individual style that they've created is the essence of their work. I don't know, Morandi painting a shelf of vases over and over again. Lots of artists are like that. And in photography, often there's a visual style that's evident throughout, a certain way of framing or way of printing that dominates the whole artistic output. And when they veer away from it, people get upset, and rather than celebrate this chameleon artist. So I think it varies. It's not just unpredictability is one thing that we value in some kinds of artists, but Caravaggio, we don't want him to keep changing his use of light. You know, when he's achieved that style, as it were, it's great that he kept to it for a while and played out variations within that.
It seems that artists are expected to have consistent aesthetics established that is unique to themselves. So when at the artist individual level, it is unique and it is surprising and different from many others. But since the artist is exploring her coherent aesthetics, they might repeat similar style but executed in different ways. And I personally enjoy seeing all these different variations of the same idea but executed in different ways.
You know, we're talking there, I think, of style. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And the question of style is connected to the notion of invention, in my view. And so, go ahead.
Can you define style?
I think of it quite literally as what the stylist does.
The mark making or
mark
whatever?
making and the repetition that you were talking about, you know, a Cartier-Bresson photograph, or you recognize style. You know immediately that it was taken by Cartier-Bresson. Or Saul Leiter, you know that Saul Leiter took that photograph, or mostly you know. Yeah.
I've got an example with Saul
Yeah,
Leiter,
I'm sure you
actually,
do.
Because he was a lifelong painter. Saul Leiter, colour photographer. Well, actually, he has different styles because he did fashion photography, but what he's best known for are these very intense colours. New York photography often taken through a window or something with raindrops coming down, very beautiful use of colour. But that's partly coming from the fact that he was a painter. He began as a painter. He painted every day. And so that bit of his oeuvre, as it were, isn't widely known about. So he actually had a number of different styles. But as a photographer, an artistic photographer, he's got a known style. That's kind of typical of photography. They've got this artistic portfolio, as it were, and they do other stuff as well that isn't quite the same. I mean, Cartier-Bresson, your example, in later life, he was obsessively drawing. But we don't tend to put that as part of his artistic output. It's sort of, oh well, you know, he did that, but he was really a great photographer of the decisive moment. But with the style thing, I think we should distinguish a style from a trademark. That style is an evaluative concept. And if you're saying someone's got an individual style, you're not just saying, well, we can recognize them in a connoisseur type way. They always, have a little, like Mondrian always did X, a little X in the corner of his picture, say. That would be like a trademark. But actually what we mean for Mondrian's style is that his choice of geometrical balanced shapes and his obsession with abstraction, that's the style, that's a coherent artistic thing. But a trademark is just a recognizable feature. So we're looking for, with individual style, we're looking for recognizable features that are at least intentionally, not necessarily conscious, but are intentionally produced. And I think they can include the choice of subject matter, the kind of, not just the surface style of a painter, but actually the kinds of things that artist painted.
Before we get to questions from the audience and online, I want to address your skepticism.
I have many skepticism. Which one are you referring to?
The skepticism very much about your subject, about AI. You're probably surrounded by scientists that maybe you admire who do not share your reservations.
I am more surrounded by skeptical people.
You're more surrounded
in a way
by
than,
my question would be, where does that skepticism come from? What should we be afraid of?
The reason why I was asking you back, which is skepticism, because there are many layers of questions about AI, whether, is it going to create existential threat question, and then there's this question of, is it going to replace humans for jobs question, and then there's this question of, can it generate something genuinely creative like Picasso did or Einstein did, and these are all different questions to me. Maybe they're related in a way, but maybe the skepticism is somewhat rooted in just recognizing errors and mistakes that these AI systems make, and the fact that it's not that surprising that these systems will make such errors because of the way that it's trained through brute force, larger scale, the data that was fed into the machine. Let me put it this way. Can you imagine raising your child by providing broadband? Let the child just watch on and on and on. But there's no interaction about question answering. The child doesn't get to select which one to watch either. Just to start right off from New York Times, whether they like it or not, or understand it or not, and then just ongoing stream of, long text. That's not how humans learn effectively. In fact, when you teach, say, AI or philosophy, you have to make the lecture notes and lecture material as opposed to let them just read, lots of Python code to figure out deep learning on their own. And so there's something about the way that we teach AI right now, which is just so far from the way humans learn. And then the question is, can AI trained that way just be equal to human intelligence?
Can it in effect have a dialogue, a real dialogue? And I was thinking about this line of John Stuart Mill, which seems to me so interesting when he says, only through a diversity of opinion is there in the existing state of human intellect a chance of fair play at both sides of the truth. And that to me, seems to be, at least for now, the limitations of AI. I don't think there is that back and forth that can happen. And we in terms of education, we had it.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
had it during COVID. Our children were at home, and the only interaction they really had was with a screen. I remember my younger boy, when the spring break came, I told him, "So you're on spring break?" And he said, "Yes, I'm closing my computer." That was what spring break meant. There was nearly no back and forth that happened for 2 years of life. So we can see we can
Surely
see.
there was somebody else on the other end of the screen.
Pardon?
Wasn't there anybody else on the end of the screen?
Yes, but don't you think there's something absolutely missing if there isn't the human relationship? Isn't that so important for context, for our sense of all of our senses in a way are not being
I think it's
used.
complicated because I think there's a different kind of interaction you have with somebody. If I have an interaction with you now, having met you and talked with you via a screen, that's very different from having a relationship with you only via a screen, because I have much more data to go on, but I've had a human connection with you of a different kind. So I think it's a bit like something Sartre said about looking at photographs, that when we look at a photograph of somebody we know, in our mind, we're not looking at a piece of cardboard with an image and trying to work out whether we're thinking about Pierre or whatever it is, or Simone. We're actually, our mind is on a real person, not a split second captured in a particular pose. And I think some of that may well go on with interactions with people we know, and that's quite a different phenomenon from interactions with, as it were, a stranger who's only appeared on a screen. But that may be a contingent limitation of the amount of sensory information we can transfer, as it were, through Zoom or whatever at the moment. I mean, that's changed radically in the last few years anyway.
That's why I work in VR, right? Like trying to explore what presence means, what connection means when it's just an avatar. Can you form human connection?
And your piece, that same side of the coin, seems to work with that.
Yes, the explorations of connection, seeing the invisibles, and just like exploring that. I think at the end of the day is like, what does that mean for us as humans to go into the virtual space and the digital space? Can we form connections through the digital space? Yes, is the answer, is what I've discovered, obviously. And there is a sense of human sense in VR, which is fascinating.
Shall I take questions from the audience and then a couple from here? Please, how shall I do? Shall I call on people? Shall I start with John?
Marie has a mic there, looks like, as well.
So fantastic discussion, and for obvious reasons, you focused on the creative arts to a large extent. But for a lot of people, their creativity is not in engaging with the arts. It's, for example, in their work. So whether they're lawyers or medical practitioners in diagnosis. So when you defended the importance of creativity, you focused on process values, the expressive nature of, you get to express your taste. But if I'm interested in a medical diagnosis, I want the correct outcome. I'm not all that bothered about the process the person went through and whether it was meaningful for them or an achievement for them. Equally, in the legal case, I might think, as Nigel indicated, I want the efficient judgment right now, not in 6 months' time, and I'm not really bothered about whether it expresses someone's sense of justice. I want a correct outcome. So I'm wondering whether outside of the aesthetic domain, the output might matter a great deal more than the process, but in consequence, you're actually eliminating huge swathes of activity where people find genuine creativity for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, if AI can truly just give you always the true answer, then I can kind of see that maybe so long as the answer is always the oracle answer, then all good. Except current AI doesn't do that, and in fact, there's this new flood of papers that basically says that in order to make AI, in order to help AI to make less errors, it really helps them to teach step-by-step reasoning, which is teaching the process. So. Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, maybe that's why I'm a little bit skeptical, because it kind of has to spoon-feed this reasoning step for certain kinds of reasoning task, like math. I mean,
it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be as good as.
But for the purpose of not being perfect but as good as humans, I think all the more you want process, because that way you can debug where the failures are from, and then be able to fix the bug of the system, without which we are just at loss with the black box AI.
I'll get to everyone, as many people as I can.
Is it? Yeah, thank you for that. I wanted to ask about the importance of process again. Kind of, John was talking about process, but I want to take it in a different angle, just to ask whether, and then related to taste, and whether AI wouldn't be able to like come up with like tasteful art or anything like that. Because I have a personal example, which is that my friend usually creates these detailed itineraries of really fun things for us to do whenever I go visit him. We go to lots of restaurants and lots of bars, lots of artistic things. And then I went to go visit him this weekend, and after a while he told me the itinerary that was created was done by ChatGPT. And it was really interesting because at first I was like, dude, you didn't go through the effort, the process of coming up with these amazing experiences for us to have. And then after undergoing all those wonderful experiences, it turned out that didn't matter that much to me. And so maybe it's just because I don't really have a lot of taste. Maybe that's the other thing to read into this. But I guess I'm just not convinced that the process will necessarily matter for the evaluation of how tasteful the aesthetic experiences it can create. So yeah, I'm just not as skeptical as you are about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So I love giving tours. I'm from Oakland in California, so I love giving my friends the Estella tour of Oakland, and that's like catered specifically to that visitor. And I start from, this is where I grew up. A block away is my preschool. I used to walk here, and then we would walk another mile. This is my elementary school where I grew up. And if you look along the wall, that's my like murals that I did. So like being able to see that kind of growth and that different process, I create a very catered, curated, personal, meaningful experience in that process. So I think it's interesting because if you were to ask ChatGPT, where should I go in Oakland, it would not be these places. So it creates a different experience altogether. Be careful about doing that in Oakland specifically also. You don't want to end up in the wrong neighborhood. So it is interesting that you brought that up, because I guess it depends. It depends on what you wanted out of it, the experience that you wanted out of it, and who is curating that experience.
And I think also, at least I read into what you were saying, that there was an element of deception, that you were deceived.
Not necessarily, because in the end he gave a bunch of information about me, saying I was a pretentious philosophy grad student who's into bars and restaurants, and then it ended up generating probably some of the similar recommendations he would have. So I don't know. I was deceived, but I easily forgave him, and it seemed like okay. And maybe I was just wondering if we can forgive that over time.
You were pleasantly deceived.
Look, if ChatGPT wrote funny jokes, it wouldn't matter about the process. If they're funny, they're funny.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of art is not like that.
Yeah, I don't think that we as a human can care about process 24/7, in the sense that, the beginning art that I used is from DALL-E 2, and I was thankful that I didn't have to go through the process of painting it myself, because I'm busy doing something else. So I think it's a case by case.
Go ahead.
Yes, so I'm not an AI expert. I'm just in Oxford because my son's got his finals right now. So, but my kind of general thoughts about AI is that I generally feel it's very narrow. That we are over exaggerating AI intelligence. It's really kind of process automation, predictive analytics, blockchain. It's all that type of stuff. It's not really. It doesn't really have emotion or pain or ideas or thinking or problem solving. And so I think from that respect, it really is generating facsimiles of human knowledge, right? It's not really having any level of creativity. And I don't really see that. I think there's a lot of fear, over-exaggerated fear about AI. That's kind of my general thought. And then the other thing about the internet, all knowledge is coming from the internet. I feel that that probably means then that liberal Western democracies have the domain of AI intelligence, because that's where all English speaking, coding is all English speaking, I'm assuming. So that's kind of where it's all coming from. So there's a skew in terms of where the intelligence is coming from. So that's another thought. And my final thought, is that from an economics perspective, there's probably a natural breaker, isn't there, in the sense that once AI gets to a certain point, productive economy people won't have jobs, and so AI, they're going to have to. It's people for the economy to function. You'll get to a tipping point where people have to be given jobs again to actually consume. So there will be a natural breaker at some point down the line. So they're my general thoughts on.
Agreed, more or less.
Professor Choi, I have a question again about the creativity definition, and what is it about humans that make them capable of going beyond induction and what you call interpolation, and to use extrapolation or this extra thing, this guess or this intuition that allows those breakthroughs and this change of paradigms, like whether it's Picasso or Einstein, or so how do you explain that?
Yeah, I cannot, in the sense that I'm not in cognitive science studying these questions, but in part from some books that I read, in particular by Scott Kaufman, who's a psychologist at UPenn, who wrote a book about creativity. I think it's Wired to Create or something, the title is. It seems that humans are driven by dopamine. We have this hormone that drives us to actually explore and something new. So for some reason, we are driven by curiosity and something new. I mean, not everyone, but there are people who are probably more driven by that than others. Why that's the case, it's hard to know. But in doing so, it seems that emotion does play some factor for certain types of creativity. And then for the kind of talk that I make, for example, I consider that as also certain kinds of creative work. I do get to do a lot of reasoning, trying to find a way to connect the dots so that I can make what appears to be a story-like flow. And so for that, I feel like it's a lot of actual hard reasoning that has a bit more symbolic nature that neural networks sort of don't have as much.
I think kind of similar and related to kind of the themes of taste that we were talking about, I want to kind of also mention design versus art, right? There's a distinction between designers who are trying to solve a problem versus fine artists. And so I think more of a designer. So the things that I'm creating is more of what is the problem that I'm trying to solve here? So just thinking about that, I just lost my thought. Oof, end of day. But I was just thinking a bit about the distinction of that and how that relates to taste, because taste is often dictated by somebody who is a creative director or a director or whatever it is. And how does that relate to the use of AI versus a human person to problem solve, rather than distinctly just human expression. So just trying to think about that in problem solving, even for a visual, emotional storytelling component. There's a lot of design in that.
Shall we take a couple more questions? Go ahead.
So I'm a second-year linguistics student, and my research focus is NLP. So I follow a lot of Professor Choi's works, and I'm also a member of Oxford NLP group. So in our group, we kind of find that linked models are constantly capturing heuristics rather than the regularities. So I think I'm not sure if it's the opposite problem of creativity. So on the one hand, AIs are constantly cannot solving the most difficult problems like creativity, but on the other hand, it's also failing in very basic problems. Do you think that these kind of two abilities actually come at the same time, and actually is that we are actually using the not efficient enough methods to train AI so that we cannot have creative enough AI? And my second problem is, a lot of AI models are trying to to embrace multimodalities, like not only language, but also like vision and things like that. So my question is, do you think that actually humans can have so many different modalities, so like humans can reason so creatively? So it's actually the modality problem that's forbidding AI or say different kind of models to be a creative thinker. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, agreed and agreed. But so that we can get more questions as well. I'm happy to chat more later.
Thank you so much. So this is not unrelated to some other questions that have been asked, but you've talked quite a lot about process and taste, and only just touched on intentionality. So it seems to me that there are extremists that might claim that it's not possible to have creativity with some kind of intentionality, without some kind of intentionality. What would you say to the intentionality skeptic? Do you believe that it is possible to read some kind of intentionality into an AI system, or indeed do you discount or sign up to this idea that intentionality is important for creativity at all?
This is such a fun question. Thank you. So I have a thought instantaneously, which is that humans always inject intentionality to other humans, whether they meant it or not. So as a result, they also do that for AI artwork as well. So they might feel like, oh, it's giving me feelings, even though they know rationally that AI didn't have intent, to the point that some people talking to the chatbot feels like they're falling in love, or they feel like chatbot is a sentient being, which again, if they're really rational, that's not true. But then, well, humans also have flaws.
And there are some artists who deliberately minimize the intentions in their work. I mean, surrealists play with that, but there's a group called the Boyle family who had somebody blindfold and throw a dart at a dartboard, I think, from which they worked out very specific square, I think it's 6 feet square, parts of the Earth's surface. And then they've spent the rest of maybe 30 years going to those places and making very realistic copies of those bits, absolutely minimizing the intention within the general framework. So they're kind of constrained by the parameters they've set.
But I suppose that the rejoinder to that would be that they have intentionally limited the intentionality.
Yeah.
So
Which is like the person who made the chatbot.
Yeah.
Does somebody have one more burning question?
Yes, can I have
Okay, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. Personally, I don't think that intelligence is possible without the subconscious, or the unconscious, if you like. So I don't think we are talking about intelligence here. I would think that for me so far, AI is like Google with nuance, and the nuance is actually not really nuance, it's just a kind of mimicry. As for the question of art, I haven't heard an updated version of what art is, because the concept of art has changed, even in the art world. For me, actually, as an artist, I would say that representation is not art. So the question of art has moved on. So I was wondering what is ethical about exporting a certain kind of propaganda to the world in the form of artificial intelligence. Because I feel it's responsible that people, let's say where I come from in Africa, should be reading Western bits of ways of looking at the world as objective reality or objective, because that's what it implies if a kid in Africa heard, this is artificial intelligence, when actually it's about filtering aspects of Western thinking and then exporting them. Is that responsible? Is that ethical even? Is that making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are a lot of ethical questions right now about the way that the data is used and what sort of data is used, and the data does reflect, by and large, people in power. So as a result, AI does have all these problems. And so some AI researchers are trying to reduce that bias, but especially given the fact that these powerful AI models belong to few tech companies, there's additional layers of challenges around that. It's a difficult time.
Estelle, Nigel, would you like to add something to this, or something other than what was asked?
Isn't it true that many of these generative AI programs are available beyond where they're created? So although they're trained at the moment on very Western content, that's not a necessary feature of them. Presumably, do you use open access coding, or is it something that's a kind of proprietary band that means that only you can program these things?
About bias, actually, you may have noticed that when I was showing this human looking into the mirror example, they were all men, until I explicitly asked for women. That's because humans had male bias all over the place. I mean, the paintings were more focused on men, and the photographs oftentimes, especially when it's about in the AI context, are about more on the men, especially particular race as well. So, can AI be taught to somehow overcome that? It's actually hard. So, some people try to do data augmentation to get away with that, but really eliminating is really fundamentally hard.
That's something that's so important to me in terms of like a storyteller and like the stories that are told. If the data sets are using a very generalized understanding of the internet at broad, you might not get the stories that represent humanity in a way that would be impactful, right? Like if it's the same story that's told over and over and over again, and you're not getting proper representation of different types of peoples on screen or whatever it may be, like that might lead into a world where we're so used to seeing the same regurgitated images over and over again that we believe that that must be real. How does one counter that? How does one overcome that? Like is it gonna be through AI or is it not?
That's where humans can really make some difference. I really don't think humans should just sit back and be attacked by AI and get dominated by choice. I think we have a choice to do something about it, to make AI models less biased and being able to even recognize it. I don't know how many of you kind of noticed that it was male dominant in the images that I showed you. Once you start to seeing it, you cannot unsee it, but a lot of people are just oblivious to it.
I think we should end on that note, on the note that we shouldn't just be passive and accept what is happening, but actually try to counter it in some way with our humanity. I think we've just touched the surface of this problem, but I'm really grateful to you three, and I want to thank the audience also for coming today. Thank you so much.